All right, welcome everyone to our virtual artist talk and studio tours. Everyone's just hopping in from our waiting room. We're happy to have you. My name is Danielle Huvenars, and I work at Westland Gallery in London, Ontario. And this talk is hosted by Westland Gallery and featuring Sheila Davis, Lorraine Roy, Jane Wright, and Nancy Calder. These four artists are part of our current exhibition, which is called In the Moment. And it's a really interesting show because each of these four artists' work is really so different and they work in such different techniques. So I think today's talk and this opportunity to walk around their studio spaces and see how they create is going to be really interesting and a great way to get to know this collection. So thank you again for joining us. We're going to be starting with some short conversations with each artist and then going around again and giving each person the opportunity to take their camera off the stand and show us their space. I'll also mention we've been running these artist talks for many, many years as a part of all of our exhibitions at Westland Gallery. And we find ourselves now in another lockdown, our third lockdown for the region, and a tough time for everyone. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to give back to our community a little bit. And so the talk is free, but we're encouraging anyone who's able to do so. If you're able to make a donation to ANOVA here in London, kind of in honor of this event, that would be wonderful and much appreciated. ANOVA is a joint venture between London Women's Community House and the Sexual Assault Centre of London. And they actually have a shelter very close to the gallery just over on Wellington. So I think about them often as I'm driving by their property. They offer all kinds of important services. So if you're able to support them, that's wonderful. So we're going to start with Jane Wright because Jane is brand new to us at Westland Gallery. Hi, Jane, if you'll give a wave to everybody.
Good afternoon. Hi.
I'm just going to change the spotlights here so everyone can just see Jane and I chatting. So Jane, you recently moved back to London, is that correct?
Yes, that is.
From Quebec. Is that right?
Yes, I've spent the last 25 years in Quebec, and but I started. I was living in London here from 1978 to 92.
All right.
So
well,
I was familiar with London. It's not quite the same place that I left. So I'm relearning London now.
Yeah, it would definitely have changed a lot in that amount of time. But we're very happy that you reached out to us when you were coming back to town because we don't have any glass artists exhibiting with us. And I think your work adds a beautiful dimension to the show that we have on now. I'd like to hear from you. Thank you. I'd like to hear from you on how you discovered glass because you shared a little bit of that with me when you were dropping your work off and you kind of came to it a little bit by chance. Can you tell us that story?
I did. I'm a longtime artist and art educator. I taught art for all of my teaching career. And I had fallen in love with watercolor. I've tried everything. I fell in love with watercolor. And I was a practicing watercolor artist. And my transition to glass is all my daughter's fault because we attended together a week at Halliburton School of the Arts one summer. She is also a teacher. And we took stained glass. And I was not so great. I was not so enthralled with it. She took it up. She went on to buy a small kiln to melt glass, to melt wine bottles. She got quite into that. And then she moved to Boston and couldn't take her kiln. So it came to my studio, sat there for a couple of years. I used it as an extra shelf. one day I had an electrician in and I said, oh, just wire it up for me. And so he did, and I started to play with it, and I got absolutely hooked with glass. And one of the reasons is, the main reason is that it's very much like watercolor in that you are concerned with the same qualities of light, transparency, and color. So it's been an easy transition in the sense artistically, less easy for myself and my husband because glass weighs a whole lot more than a palette of watercolors to move around. So
I love that story because I think it's common for a lot of artists. You kind of stumble on something and there's that moment where you're like, oh, you know what? This is what I should be doing, or this is the next step for me, at least, because so many artists work through different series and even different mediums throughout their career, right? So there was the calling for what was next for you. I find it interesting. I can see the relationship in terms of light and in terms of transparency, but it's I imagine a really different process, I imagine it to be a much more physical process. Is that true?
It's very much a physical process. You have to handle the glass, you have to cut it, you have to move it. When you see through my studio, I buy it in 30 by 40-inch sheets, which have to be carefully manipulated and cut. So it is a very different process. It takes most of the time a minimum of 24 hours for a complete firing in the kiln. And you have to think somewhat backwards, like watercolor. You have to think through the different layers. With acrylics and oils, I've done that. If you make a mistake, you just wait till it's dry and you paint over it. There's none of that with watercolor. There's none of that with glass. And what really attracts me is as the Japanese say, an accidental happenings, something that you have to give up control when you put your work in the kiln, like you do when you lay down wet watercolor. You have to wait and see what the medium is going to do with your idea. So it's always a thrill and a bit of a terror to open the kiln and see what may have happened. And the mistakes are sometimes able to be regulated, but most of the time not. And the other beauty of glass, which appeals to my Scottish nature, in Quebec, I was known by my maiden name, which is Macbeth. I hate to throw things out. In glass, there is never any waste. Even things that don't work out get pulverized and repurposed. So I like that ecological footprint of it as well.
Wonderful. Very interesting. I relate, as someone who enjoys working in ceramics, to that chance when you put things in the kiln and you kind of cross your fingers and see how it turns out. How have you found that your subject matter or your inspiration has changed working in watercolor and in glass? I know you have some very well developed ideas for your pieces. You wrote us some beautiful summaries for a lot of them that are in the show. We've shared a few of them on Facebook, and there are more to come. Did you always have a story to tell with your work before glass?
I love stories. I love to tell stories. I love to listen to stories. And so for me, whatever I do, whether it's making a quilt or knitting a sweater, there's always a story attached to it. And sometimes it stays in my head. And then when it gets out, my children go, okay, come on, get on with it. Get to the end of it. What do you want to say? So some of my ideas, I develop the work from the words, and other times the words come from simply playing with the glass. And I audition the glass on my work table. If I don't have a specific idea, I just get all my bits out, put them on the work table, and sometimes it might be one piece of glass. For example, in the bowl that you have in the gallery, the brightly colored bowl, it was one little innocuous piece of ivory colored glass, irregular shaped. I couldn't let that go. I couldn't fit it in and I couldn't let it go. And I stayed at it until I got something that pleased my eye. So I'm, as most artists, I assume, I'm primarily concerned with pleasing myself. With what I create. And when I'm happy with it, then I'm happy to let it move on.
Yeah. I think that that's what attracts other people too, right? You find the resolution there for your idea, and then it finds another person that enjoys exactly what you've created. So thank you for sharing all of that, Jane. I'm going to bring Nancy Calder up as my next spotlight, and we'll return to Jane in a little bit and take a walk around her studio. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Danielle.
Now, unlike Jane, you're a frequent exhibitor at Westland Gallery. We've been working with you for a number of years. And,
you have?
Yeah, quite some time. I imagine that you relate a bit to what Jane was saying in terms of storytelling, because so much of your work is where she's putting pieces of glass together, you're pulling different objects together to kind of create a story or paint a picture of somebody.
That's true. I was fascinated that Jane could so clearly articulate her compositions, and that's something that I struggle with a bit. I know the story is there, and sometimes it evolves even after I have made the composition. And I find too, people will read different things than what I intended. So it's an interesting process. You've seen my wall of props, and our guests will see it later on. Sometimes it's just one object that moves me. But again, like Jane, I will start a setup and I'll leave it out for maybe a week or two, and I keep passing and adding and removing and till there's something I'm happy with.
I love that. Many people might remember Nancy's hat series, which we had at the gallery last year, 2020, I believe. And it's a prime example of the way that you storytell with art, because each one of those brought us such a clear image of the person who might wear that hat, and the other elements of the activity that they're partaking in that day. So that was a beautiful collection. And one piece from your newest works, you have 4 pieces as a part of this first rendition of the exhibition in the moment. And I will mention, since this exhibition has been displaced by this most recent lockdown, there will be more work by all 4 of these artists returning to the gallery walls after we're back open again, so that everyone has the opportunity to come and see their work in person, which is so important. Especially, I would say, for work like yours, Nancy, because there's so many people who are disbelieving that it is a painting and not in fact a photograph, because you work in such a high realism technique. Where did you learn? I know you learned it a lot at the Toronto Realism Academy, but can you tell us a bit about developing your skills as a realism painter?
Well, again, like Jane, my younger daughter phoned me one day and she said, "Oh, Mom, there's this school in Toronto. A friend of hers had just enrolled." She said, "We have to go for a tour." So we had a tour of the Academy of Realist Art in Toronto, and we were both totally smitten and both enrolled. She stayed for a year and then she went back to university. I continued, and 7 years later I graduated. I've always been a huge fan of realism. I love all styles of painting, but particularly realism. So it was a really good fit for me.
Mm-hmm. All the daughters getting their mothers into artwork. I like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
helping
exactly.
develop the style. Nancy, there's one piece in the current collection that features a nurse's hat. And I was so interested to see that come in, especially, right now. And we put it in the window right away as a little acknowledgement of how hard all of our healthcare workers are working this year. Was that what you were thinking about when you created this piece, or is that just chance that it happened this year?
Well, it was a combination. When I was working on the hat series, I was always searching out hats, and I did find the nurse's cap, and it sat up on my shelf, and it didn't make the series of the 10 paintings, and it was sitting there. And then when COVID struck, one day I looked up and I saw the nurse's cap, and I thought, it's time. It's time. And my mother was a nurse. My daughter was a nurse. I have in the painting, the graduation picture is my mother's graduation picture from Women's College Hospital in 1947.
Oh, wow.
You won't be able to pick her out. The little kit with the scissors and tweezers and thermometers was also my mother's. The pin on the cap was my mother's. The other objects were just items that I had found, and I came up with an arrangement that I really liked, and it was just, it fell into place, and it was timely. And so it's a tribute to the frontline nurses during COVID in particular, but I was reminded that nurses have always been there. But that's, it was just one of those things that came together. It's personal and not personal, and I think a lot of people can relate to it. It was timely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that those pieces, the hat and the photographs, actually did belong to your mom, and your collection of inspiration items that you create your still lifes from, I love, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with everyone when we walk around your studio. But is your mom a collector as well? Do you get that from her? A keeper of things?
Well, my mom's 94, and after cleaning out her home and her cottage, I would say yes, a definite collector, if not a hoarder.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to coming back, Nancy, and you can show us your shelves of things, and perhaps even kind of how you set up your still lives to get started on a painting. So we'll return to you in a second. We're going to chat next with Lorraine Roy. Hi, Lorraine.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us for this virtual event today. I'm particularly
this is fun.
there might be a little bit of a lag here. I'm very much looking forward to seeing your space as well. I know you've been working on a big project, and we can share that with everyone very soon. Your work adds an interesting dimension to this exhibition as well. Each of the four artists, like I mentioned, works in such a distinct style. And for your work, that is textile. And you came to textile very young through,
Yes,
mother's influence and family influence. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is a mother-daughter talk, I think.
It is.
Because my mother is the one who brought me to textiles. I learned how to sew actually when I was around 6 years. And at that time we were dolls' clothes and just little household items. And I think more than sewing, I just fell in love with the box wraps that she had. Like, who doesn't love a box of wraps for a little kid, right?
Yeah.
So it was just it was magical for me, the way that the fabrics felt, the different ways that they reflected light, and all the different things I could do with them. It was that really the start for me. And because I wasn't a very good seamstress, I did really like I like to embellish, and which led me to embroidery, which more or less led me to where I am now.
Great. We're having a little bit of breaking up on what you're saying, Lorraine, but you mentioned falling in love with the boxes of scraps that your mom had. And that more so than an interest in seamstress work, you found yourself drawn to the more decorative elements of embroidery and eventually into kind of quilting and patchwork, and this really unique process that you have. I don't know what you call it, but you have scraps of fabric and their raw edges are visible, and there's this beautiful decorative stitch work on top. How did you develop
Yeah,
that particular style?
in the early days, I was doing a lot of hand embroidery. I think what I was always do is to create that hand embroidery. I work exclusively by machine now, but hand embroidery has a little stretchy marks and the looseness that you don't have when you turn things under, for example, for sewing. I like the way that fray imitate nature really well. And I was trying to make images that looked a lot like nature, that looked very, very realistic. And in order to do that, well, I kind of had to let the fabric speak. The fabric has its own, I don't know, reflectivity and its own, in its makeup. It's made up of so many smaller threads. And you take it apart and the little rock, it's usually considered a negative, but in my work, it's a positive thing because it does reflect so much better than very, very sharp. And the way that I sew also reflects that well, because I what's called free motion embroidery, which means I can literally almost write with a sewing machine because I can move my fabric in all directions. And so it kind of a little bit like pencil in the way that I sew.
Yes, I completely know what you're saying, Lorraine. I'm just going to make a quick reminder to anybody who has their mic on, just to mute themselves so we can reduce the feedback on Lorraine's video. But yes, so you were talking, Lorraine, about how exposing the raw edges of the fabric and embracing that really adds to your work in particular because you're so focused on nature. And of course, nature isn't, you know, precise tucked under edges. It's all those loose, messy bits. So I agree, it works really, really well. And then you were mentioning at the end there that your method of stitching, which we'll see when we do the studio tour, I think you're gonna show us. Is that correct, Lorraine? Quick little bit of stitching.
Show you them. I won't be able to demonstrate,
Okay,
but I can show you
the machine.
General idea.
Okay,
Yes.
so the machine and the way that it's set up allows you to kind of stitch in every direction, and it really creates these lines that are more drawing, really, than like a structural stitch. Would that be an accurate way of describing it?
Exactly, yes.
Yes. So you have a couple of different series that you work in, Lorraine, and kind of what you were just mentioning now is some of your earlier work. You were really creating these landscape scenes. You were creating, you know, landscape paintings in textile. And in recent years, you've expanded off of that into a couple of series. You do these beautiful circular wall hangings, which employ more of a quilting technique. And another series where we see these singular trees on these kind of semicircles of color and pattern. A few of those are in the show as well. Can you explain the differences between those three series to you?
Okay. I have a touring exhibition right now that's entirely made up of round wall hangings. And that was a brand new way of working for me, because to me, the circle represented the way that everything is connected. When I finished that series, which is actually touring Canada right now, I was so excited about working in the circle that I thought, well, I've got to keep on exploring this. And so not only am I making wall hangings that are circular, I also make framed pieces that are circular. And you will see those in my studio as well when I'm walking through. The other pieces, the ones that you're talking about with the lines beneath, just jump right off of those circular pieces. If you cut those, or if you expanded those, you could make circles out of those as well. So I guess I do other things than circles, you will see. But and I still am doing some landscape. But I'm so enthralled by the different things that I can do in that particular motif that right now I'm not seeing an end to it.
Yeah. And it has a beautiful echo back to actually what your degree is in, because you studied landscape, or what did you study? Landscape architecture?
Yeah, not quite. I have a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, majoring in ornamental horticulture. I never actually learned landscaping per se. I'm more of a plant maintenance type person, but I did a lot of work with native trees when I worked at the University of Guelph Arboretum. And that is reflected in my work every day as well, because to me, native trees are really, really important, increasingly important in preserving our environment. And I love studying, well, learning more about them in the natural world, but I also, for me, trees are kind of like people. And in my work, I try to make the tree, I don't know, give it emotion or bring in some kind of spiritual element to it that adds to the experience of viewing the piece and sort of the learning that's involved in viewing the piece.
Absolutely. And those circular pieces will always, remind the viewer of the circles of a tree, a cross section of a tree and kind of the history of the tree. So that definitely comes across. Your audio is really good now, so I don't know. It's funny because Lorraine and I actually did a test run to make sure that everything would work smoothly in her studio, because it's an outbuilding on her property. But you never know. Technology will always throw a little wrench at you. So. But thank you, Lorraine. We're going to talk next with Sheila, and we'll come back around to see your studio space. Thank you. Hi, Sheila.
Hello.
You're up next.
There we are.
How
are you?
Yes. And again, your work really adds dimension to this show. And no two of these artists work in the same style whatsoever. And I particularly love talks like this with artists whose work is so divergent from one another, because we do find these common threads, these points of connection between the ways in which each artist work, and I love discovering that. So Sheila, you bring a very spontaneous approach, a very dynamic style of painting. You work in oils just like Nancy, but there's not too much similarity beyond that in the ways that you work.
No.
How did you come to develop your spontaneous, energetic painting style?
I started in watercolor years ago, 30 years ago, I think, and fell in love with watercolor and painted it for many years. And same thing, I loved the clarity, got into the negative painting. Then I found out that as I went on, that you couldn't get anything bigger than a full sheet. So 22 by 30 was kind of the max size, unless you went into an elephant. And then of course, the glass and everything is just very big and heavy. And I found that the glass was becoming more of a barrier between the viewer and the painting. I really wanted the viewer to experience the painting and the brush marks and all that stuff. And you don't get that with watercolor. That's one thing you don't get with it. So then I moved from watercolor into acrylic for a number of years. And then from there, moved into a house that had very dry air. So moved into oil painting. And I've been with that for 12, 14 years now, maybe. And I just love it. I still have acrylics. I got a whack of acrylics in the studio, but I always end up going back to the oil. There's just so much more playtime with it, where you can scrape and remove and have fun getting really abstract with it.
Yeah.
But I still, those watercolor roots are still with me. I still do negative painting. I don't follow those set rules with oil paint that a lot of people do. I'm still going back to my watercolor roots and working with transparent colors and layering them on top of each other and then lifting color and scraping color. And
it's
yeah.
fascinating because I think you're primarily self-taught, Sheila, and
Yes.
for artists like that, the technique that you have ended up with is so informed by each of those little steps along the way, right? And
oh, absolutely.
the
Yes.
techniques
Yeah.
of watercolor come through in some interesting ways in your painting. There's a couple pieces behind you that hopefully we'll get to take a look at.
Sure. Yes.
During
Well,
your
only one
studio
piece.
tour.
The white one is just a scribble sheet. I was teaching this past couple days, so that one, the little one is that's just my little scribble sheet where I do little short demos.
But yeah, so yeah, but you do have a unique way of starting in terms of oil painting. You don't do the traditional underpainting, really.
No, not really. No, I slap it on I slap I slap it on very wet with large brushes and slowly lift out an image and start very muted and very wet, slowly tighten up and bring clarity and chroma into the piece until it's where I want it to be. And there's lots of marks on it. I feel that a painting should work from every distance. I always think of my work hanging outside a lady's washroom as we're all lined up getting closer and closer, that the work reads well from a distance, but as you get closer, you see more little explosions of color and small marks that make the work very exciting. So there's a lot of little marks in my work that you don't see unless you're standing in front of it in person.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we show a couple artists that work in, kind of a semi-abstracted landscape genre. And what's beautiful about those works is exactly what you say. From a distance, you see the impression of the landscape. You get a feel for light or weather in that scene. And up close, it's all about that brushwork and color and texture and all those beautiful elements. So I love that very much in your work.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I say now that my subject is my is the paint. The actual the landscape that I'm painting is simply a way of getting to the paint, but the actual subject of the painting is actually the paint itself, right?
Yeah,
the
the
way
focus
it behaves.
is on the materials. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Have you found any changes this last year in terms of gathering your inspiration? I don't know if you have certain forests, certain areas that you like to turn to for inspiration, and have you been able to visit those places this year?
Well, my husband and I are avid campers, and we did go camping last year, and we're planning to again this year. It's getting harder and harder to find a camping spot, though.
Those sites are getting
and then a group that I belong to, we would go to a retreat up near Halliburton for a few weekends a year, and just sometimes it's just a random drive, with the camera and stuff like that. And I've always got my camera in hand, and I have about probably 10,000. Well, I have about 3 terabytes of photos on my computer.
So no shortage of inspiration.
I've been painting a long time. I have a lot of reference material that I can refer to.
Yeah.
And I don't paint plein air very often. I'm kind of, we live in farmland, so it's not that exciting. I'd have to drive for quite a distance. And I find when I do paint plein air, I seem to tighten up and paint those pretty little landscapes. So I'm much more abstract and loose and experimental in my studio than I am outside. And plus I like to work large. It's kind of hard to do on location. So I prefer studio work. So I do have lots of reference photos that I can play around with, and I use my computer to manipulate them and get them where I want them and play around with some colors and move some stupid trees that Mother Nature put in the wrong spot. And
that's
and then
the
I go
beauty.
from there.
Yeah. So what is it that calls to you? So if you're looking for a bit of inspiration and you've got your camera in hand, what elements really speak to you in a forest?
The things that we don't see when we're looking at them. So when you're looking at a landscape, what you see in front of you, you're focused on that, and it's all the little things going on over here. So the trees moving and the light sparkling and those little branches catching the light. And then when you actually turn your head to focus on them, they're gone, because they're very subtle. And those are the little things that I like to catch. A lot of movement. My work has a ton of movement in it, and abstract qualities. So it's the play of light and chroma and the wind, how it affects it. And like I said, when you turn your head, it's gone. So
Yeah.
you don't even know if you saw it or if you just imagined it, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I try to catch. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. Yes, you paint a lot of kind of the underbrush scenes and
yes, chaos.
Yeah.
I paint chaos. Yes. Yes.
Lovely. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for bringing a little chaotic energy to this exhibition, Sheila. And we'll come back
Thank you.
around to you soon to take a look at your studio.
Okay.
All right.
So we are in your studio space, which is where?
Yes. This is on William Street in downtown London. People who know London will know it as the old Bob Martin golf shop. And I have a space in the back. In Quebec, I had a studio in my whole garage was my studio. Here, I'm living on a 12th floor condo. And so I needed a place to work. So I have this little gallery space here, and I have, I'll try and back up so you can see, I have some of my watercolors are here. I do some collaboration with a woodworker who makes these charcuterie boards, and I make the pieces of glass for him to embed in them as little novelty items. The big orange piece in behind you see is that's the size that I get my glass. So I have to manipulate that to cut it up for my needs.
Wow.
And I also have dabbled in acrylic, alcohol ink, and played with little bits of glass for pendants and things. And
alcohol ink gives those same fun transparency elements that
yes,
I can see.
and
that
the completely and the element of surprise. You just, the loss of control. You have some control, and then you have to just let it go. It's like having children. You have control for a while, and then you pretty much step back and let them do what they want.
There you go.
So this is my little gallery space, and then I have my studio here. So this kiln is, I have to back through the door so you can see it. It will do a piece approximately 2 feet by 45 inches. So it's large. I bought that when I knew I was moving to London. And then I have this is the kiln that my daughter has now abandoned to me. I still have it. I still use it. I have them both going a lot. And I use a lot of ceramic molds as slump molds. So when you make a piece of glass for a bowl, you make it flat and then fire it. And then the second firing, and maybe the third, you put it into a form or a mold, and it is fired to a slightly lower temperature, and the glass softens just enough to take the shape of the mold. So yes, I'm still doing wine bottles. Family and friends love these for little gifty things. So if I have room in the kiln, I stick them in.
Put a couple in there. Do you buy, or how do you source the slump molds that you use?
These are purchased, but I have some that are just high fire stoneware from an artist friend in Quebec. They cracked, and she couldn't use them, but they work fine for molds. Like with ceramics, you coat the molds with a kiln wash, a glass separator,
Okay.
and
Yep.
so that the glass will come out of the mold. So the molds are mostly ceramic, but also stainless steel. So there's a stainless steel bowl. Stainless steel is a metal that can go in the kiln. It will not melt at the temperatures that we're working with. So I have a lot of glass, and I pick and choose what I'm doing. The colors, I start working with colors. I try to keep it sorted. It doesn't stay sorted for very long. I also use odds and ends of glass that maybe they're bits and pieces from other works. And I break a lot with a hammer, smash it up, put it back in the kiln, make interesting things. One of the other elements of the glass is called frit. And frit is really powdered glass or glass ground up into smaller bits from a powder, fine, medium to large. And I make my own frit as well by putting a stainless steel colander full of scrap into the oven, into the kiln to 500 degrees. Then you take it out. I have picked a putter up out of the garbage on my walk to work one day, and I pick it up out of the kiln and then plunge it into a bucket of water, and it shatters and makes the little bits of glass.
And so what's
So
the frit then used for? To add color or like texture?
Yes, texture, color, and also some if you fire the frit to a very high temperature, it just melts like glass. But if you fire it to a lower temperature, it will maintain some of the shape of whatever shape that it had beforehand. So I also, this is my work table. I came in yesterday with the intent to clean it up, and I got so engrossed in my project that I didn't clean it up. So
No
this is my
problems. We're
next
seeing an
project.
in-action table.
So this is my next project. It's going to be 3 layers, and it will be all fused together. So the final size will be the 6 by 12, and it'll be 3, maybe 4 layers fused on top of each other. So you can see the tools of the trade here. The most important thing is are the cutters. I have several different varieties of cutters. This is called a running plier. No, I guess I haven't got it in the, okay, there it is, a running plier. So when you score with the cutter, then this plier has a curved end, and you put the glass in there and apply pressure, and it will break it apart along the score, hopefully, fingers crossed. And then also we use mosaic nippers, and those are these are standard nippers. I've just lusted after a pair that have a different configuration, so it's less stress on older hands. But so my workspace is here, and then this is my office, which is never tidy. So and lots of leftovers from painting and watercolor, and I can't throw anything out. It's just easier to store it and keep it. So this space is working quite well for me now, but as I progress and evolve as a glass artist, I am quite sure I'll be interested in a larger space. But at the moment, this is just fine. This is fine. So that's pretty much my space.
What a great space, Jane. Thank you for sharing that with us. I personally am happy that we got to see it kind of in action with some of your work out on the table, and get a little hint of your process as well. Yeah, this is Jane's work. It's beautiful. There are a number of pieces in the window that you can see at Westland too.
This stuff right here that I'm pointing to, that is the frit. And this is actually waste product from previous projects, and I keep it. And I have an old blender, and I throw it in the blender with some water and the glass,
Yeah.
and then dump it out, strain it, and then reuse the glass in other projects. So
Very
as I say,
interesting.
nothing is thrown away.
Yeah, yeah, and that adds a beautiful kind of texture contrast with the smooth glass. That's really nice. I will
Yes,
share at the
yes.
end of this chat, I'll post a link to the Westland Gallery website where you can see all the work in this collection. And you can walk by as well. We've got it all displayed in the window. Thank you so much, Jane.
Okay, thank you.
So for
Okay.
those who have watched some of our previous artist talks, we've chatted with Nancy before, but I always look forward to seeing her studio because I love the shelves she has with all of her inspiration pieces on them. So
All right. We'll go right to the doorway so you get
Alright.
a better idea. This is a bedroom in my home.
Well.
And here are my shelves of inspiration.
Yes, I love these. I hope one day
I'll
to
give
maybe
everybody
visit.
vertigo here.
I think the horizontal is good.
Yeah.
So you have all kinds of, so if you look at Nancy's work online or on her website or in the window, you'll see a lot of still life. And Nancy, you have experience painting in portraiture as well and all kinds of genres. But you find still life is very conducive to painting in the studio.
It is. My studio has 2 windows with blinds, so I can control my lighting. I have 2 setups. Here is one. It's a setup that I'm working on. There's the painting.
Yep. So how do you, sorry,
Here's
go
my
back
second
to
setup.
that. Oh, and this is another one. Perfect.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit, because you've told me about this before, and I find it fascinating, kind of the process of staging a still life, lighting the still life, and positioning your canvas kind of in relation to the still life.
Okay. My easel isn't usually where you see it. This setup is, that's about my perspective.
Yeah.
I use comparative measurement. So I chose one object in the still life and I use that as my measurement. So that was the width of the board.
Okay.
And I can say, oh, the timer is 3.5 boards high and the jar is 5 boards high, that sort of thing. I'm still working with my series in time. So we still have the big clock in the back. This is a workbench at break time because it's an interval timer there.
Yeah.
Nothing too deep.
Nothing
So
too
there's vintage tools.
like depth of field, nothing too deep. Is that what you mean? Or
no, I meant in terms of meaning. It's about, I would say 24 inches deep in perspective.
Yeah. And so then normally when you're painting, would you close the blinds and add artificial light, or do you like to use the natural lighting?
Usually I use the artificial lighting because I can control it. It's the same every time I go back.
Yeah.
This is my second setup. It's site size, so the painting is actually, the objects in the painting are the same size as the objects in the setup. So, and that's a little taxidermy budgie.
Yes, the birds feature in your work a lot.
These are the other paintings for the moment in time.
Yeah.
Lots of oil paints, lots of brushes. Because I work in my home, I have an air filter.
Yeah.
Most times I will draw out my painting.
Wow.
And then on the reverse of the drawing, I cover it with oil paint. And then I trace my drawing onto the canvas.
Oh, interesting. So do you do the,
So
would you put your paper up on your easel then and draw kind of in the same
yeah,
way?
a drawing board.
I
then
mean, do you
remove
draw
the
from the,
paper.
yeah.
Yeah, I draw from my easel. And then I replace the drawing board with the canvas when it's transferred.
Neat.
And that's about it.
Do you have any
I did tidy up for you.
Sorry?
I did tidy up for you.
Thanks very much. We appreciate it. Do you have any new finds, new pieces of inspiration that you want to share with us? We haven't been able to go, thrift shopping and antique shopping as much this year, but.
No, although Etsy's a lot of fun. You can get in, find just about anything. You can be as specific as saying, I want a white teacup with 2 handles, and you'll probably find one on Etsy. Yeah, it's unfortunate that a lot of the thrift shops are closed. So sometimes just wandering through will give me inspiration, an idea.
Hopefully we can get back to that very soon.
Yeah, me too.
All right, we're going to take a look at Lorraine's studio next. Thank you, Nancy. All right, Lorraine. So I see you have walked outside, and Lorraine is very lucky to have this building on her property, which has become her studio. Was it a garage to begin with, Lorraine?
Actually, it was the original house that stood on the property before the actual house was built. So it's quite large. It's 20 by 30 feet. And we just took it down and rebuilt on top of the footprint of the place. So just walking in now. It is my studio, it's all to myself, which is, I know, really, really lucky. And so I'm sort of paying here to show you a little bit more about it. Yeah, so yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning how much inspiration you got from your mother's scrap fabric bins.
Yes, and so I'm going to show you here my stash. So this is where I keep the big pieces. This is where I keep the slightly smaller pieces. And I keep my frit, I mean, now I have a word for it, in these little bags. So, so Jane and I have a lot in common in that way. And then I have all my threads, a lot of the threads here. Actually, with my work, I often cut up small bits of thread. So I have a really, sorry, I shouldn't have done that, a really big collection of DMC cottons and those kinds of things that I actually use to cut up. I bought out a couple of stores that were going out of business, took everything they had and then in the storage cabinet, and that was great for me.
Oh, that's amazing.
So there's my, yeah. And over here, I have my sewing machines. I call them my right and my left arm. So the one at the back is an old Bernina. That's the back of it. Which I use for mainly household sewing. And then this is an even older Bernina. It's maybe 45, 50 years old. It has a 3 horsepower motor. It can go through many, many layers, which it has to because, which it has to because of my work. Mm-hmm. This is not a delicate machine. I can sometimes just stick a fork in it to make it work, which is really great.
It's industrial.
I'll show you something close up here. Yes, it's an industrial machine. I'm just adding a little bit of detail to this piece. I have been adding some detail to this piece, but I just wanted to show you the back of it because that's how you'll see what the stitching is like. It's very kind of messy.
Yeah.
There's, I love the fact that I'm not a perfectionist. It's like just makes all of this so much better. So you can see there's quite a bit of stitching in there, but it's very, very loose and it doesn't quite follow straight lines. And then when you flip it over, you see how the composition came together. There are lots of other elements in this piece, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And then the central part is actually done in a slightly different way. The leaves on the tree are the little bits of fabric that you saw over there that I called the frit, laid down on a background piece of fabric and then netting put on top and then machine stitched on top of that. So that's, I use combinations of 3 or 4 different techniques to put my pieces together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so sorry, just
This
to
is my
clarify,
desk.
you have like very, very small scraps of fabric and they're kind of held in place by the netting and the stitching combination.
By the netting.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So that's how tiny those little pieces can be, or even smaller than that. It's cut up threads, cut up bits of fabric. And when you cut them up small enough, you can get brand new colors out of them. I'm sure that Jane would say the same thing. If you put a green and a blue together, your eye ends up seeing a bluish green, which is great. So it's almost like mixing paint in a way.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so another piece that I'm working on here, not as much detail on the back of this one because I added a new back to it, but that's one that I've been working on. And this is a piece of fabric that kind of inspired it. Sometimes I'm inspired by a piece of fabric. And sometimes I'm inspired by literature. Sometimes I'm inspired by a story, a poem. Here's a piece that was inspired by a poem that's going to be shown at the Carnegie Gallery later on. This one is called Anticipation. So the poem itself was about a woman driving by an orchard and then suddenly seeing a small wild tree that was completely in bloom while the orchard was still waiting to come into bloom. And so, I mean, this was my interpretation of what that story was all about. So.
Love that. Where did you come across the poem?
The poem is by a member of the Tower Poetry Society. I'm organizing an exhibition at the Carnegie Gallery of 10 artists who are interpreting 10 poems from the Tower Poetry Society for the occasion of their 70th anniversary. And that's going to be shown in June.
What a great
And we're
concept.
really hoping we're hoping people will be able to actually visit it.
Hope so.
Now, walking further into the studio, there isn't normally a pile of fabric like this on the floor, but this is 83 shirts that a client of mine collected. Well, her husband passed away 5 years ago. He loved collecting shirts. She saved them and she's been looking for an artist ever since who would do something with these shirts. And she found me, I think through Instagram or something. So as you can see, they are wildly wonderful shirts. I had to ask what were the shirts like before I accepted this commission. She wants me to do 13 pieces. And this is kind of what I came up with. This car one was actually a car that was right across the shirt.
Wow.
And I just added a background to it.
Cool.
And in each of these, I'm also putting some buttons from the shirts. So I'm almost at the end. I just have one more to make. So that's kind of what I've got so far.
That's such an interesting take on your work.
Oh, the story is wonderful. Yes.
It is wonderful.
Yeah.
Get this collection of fabrics with so much history.
Yeah, you can see in each of these pieces, I'm using 5 or 6 or 7 different shirts because I'm trying to use them all up. So that's my excuse if things don't always quite match up, because it's a shirt that I had to use. So this is another recent piece with a snake in it. I love snakes, so I sometimes put them in my pieces. And then this is another series of what I call the broken cycles, in which the circle is cut. And then when you move that cut, it ends up making a spiral. And I just love how that kind of feels like nature to me. We're breaking the cycles, but the cycles are coming back together again anyway. And here's another one from that series.
Wow.
And I love insects too. I'm kind of an amateur entomologist. So this is a bumblebee piece. I've done quite a few of those. And then this is another piece that's inspired by a poem. So that was, or not a poem, but a quote from Olga Tokarczuk, who is a Polish philosopher. Being imagined is the first step to existence. And when I heard that, I had all kinds of ideas in my head about what that could look like, the being imagined part, which is under the ground. So there are easily 50, 60 different fabrics all mixed up together in the bottoms of these pieces. I made around 30 of them so far, and this is the biggest of them.
Beautiful.
Yes, so, and then another round piece.
Yeah, it's one of the wall pieces.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes.
I mean,
So-
beautiful work, and it's fascinating to see the space that you work in.
Thank you.
Yeah, this
And
is
this is a scarf. This is a
scriptures too.
scarf piece. Yes. Yes. And you have one. You have one at the gallery right now. So.
We do. Why do you
I
call them
really do.
escarpment scriptures?
Well, first of all, I live on the escarpment now because I'm in Dundas, and we just I moved here about 16 years ago, and scriptures is kind of my way to honor the very, very old trees that are on the escarpment. Oh, I'll show you. I'll give you a close up here. So when you look at these closely, you'll see in most of them inscribed is tree rings. And the tree rings are meant to convey the idea of the very, very old trees, especially the white cedars that survive and live on the escarpment. So that's my way of sort of bringing importance to them and making us think about them, even though they're very small. And they don't
It's
look very
fascinating.
important.
It's amazing that they can grow in those little slivers of space between the rocks. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So, and that's another from that series of the being imagined pieces here. So I make little smaller ones and bigger ones. And here's another one here. So there's lots of work in my studio right now, which is great.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Lorraine. That was fascinating.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Apparently the space bar turns off your video as well as your mute. So are we on now?
You're on. We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay, all right, great. So I am tethered to my computer here, so I'm going to pick up my my little camera here that I use. I'm very jealous now. All these ladies have wonderful studio spaces, and I have this crammy little old building. Anyhow, about 7 years ago, we converted our garage. Well, I converted our garage into my studio space. It's not very big. It's about 11 by 20. And I keep talking about making it bigger, but then I keep changing my mind. So there's the door where you come in.
Yep.
I can't see the screen. So there's the door where you come in. I got my hydro panel there. There's enough hydro in this building that somebody could run a MIG welder if they wanted to. And,
you ever decide you're
have,
changing mediums?
Yeah, I have gas heat here, which is really nice, efficient and toasty warm in here. And it works even when the power is off, so it's great. I have my little shelf thing of doodads. We artists collect a ton of little doodads, and each one means something different. I remember where I got them, and they all have special meaning to me from friends. This is my office. I said my studio was small with my desk, which I did, and my filing cabinet and my printer and all my studio crap. And there you are. Hello. My computer, and this big thing hanging over here is a boom arm, which has another camera on it for when I'm teaching.
Yeah, so
And,
Sheila has been running a lot of Zoom
it
workshops.
took me a year to do that. I was all gung-ho to do that right away. But I discovered some software that really got me going that makes life much easier. So now I can do that because, you know, when you paint vertically, figuring out how to do that and show your easel and your image and everything so that it can be seen well is really tricky. So
Yeah.
I found that software, which is very handy. I got my bookshelf with all my books on it, which I haven't looked at in about 20 years. I should read more. And that is my my palette sitting on top of my table there, and all my crap underneath it, and some of my used paint brushes. Then I have another monitor because I've been teaching a lot. So the top one is so I can see my Zoom participants.
And then the bottom one is for the image that I'm painting from. And I keep saying how lucky we are in this digital age that you can, go for a walk and take a photo, come inside, throw it up on a screen so it's almost as big as you saw it, and paint it almost immediately. Anybody my age, we remember those old days when we used to take, photos with a real camera.
Yeah.
And 3 months later, when you get them developed, you wondered what the hell it was that you saw. And you never paint from it again. Yes, yeah. So digital age is wonderful. And then I have storage where I have all my extra paint. I don't buy 1 tube at a time when I'm running out. I buy gallons and a dozen tubes at a time. And my big easel, which I just love, with the piece drawing on it. This is one from the workshop that I just did just the other day. And then in behind it, everything in my studio is on wheels for a reason, because it's a small studio. In behind it, I have shelves for drying work.
Yep.
Leaning against there, and I'm always hopeful that I don't fling paint on them when I'm painting a new one. This is my little scratch board, I call it. This is, when I'm teaching, I give demonstrations on specific brush strokes and stuff. And I keep this easel for doing smaller work. This easel was owned by Duncan McPherson, who used to do the political cartoons for the Globe and Mail. So it's got some real good history. I can never get rid of this. It's been rebuilt many times. It's very rickety and old, but it's got good vibes, so I keep it. So work drying. And then over here is my storage rack with some stuff that just came back from you guys, and some stuff that I just spray varnished the other day, and then some stuff that needs to be stripped off, and some that's just waiting to go places. And that's the chair for the dogs. I do have 2 little puppies that sit with me. And then over there, believe it or not, over there is where I also prep my panel. So I work on panel, I work on wood. So I have to, it comes naked. So I have to stain the edges and gesso it and get it all prepped for painting. And then as you can see, I put tape on my edges, sorry.
Oh, there we go. Yes. You put tape and then you stain them when you're
I stain them and then I put tape on them to protect them. So
yeah,
just
it's a beautiful effect.
Yeah, it is. It's nice because they don't need framing because they're big pieces, right? So that's how they look when they're done. A nice wood edge on them. So sometimes they get framed, but very often they don't. And that panel there is the one for next weekend. Yeah, that's kind of exciting. Yes.
Yes. We did have one question for you. Susan was wondering, what software are you using for your workshops?
Okay, it's called OBS. And OBS, yes, kind of sounds feminine, yes. I found it on YouTube. I was just poking around looking for multiple camera intakes in Zoom, and this software came up, and the teachers use it, and it's great. It's a great software. It shows as many cameras as you want, and I have a camera over. I didn't show that one. I also have my air conditioning I put in last year. Yay! That funny little camera shines right down on my palette. So people can see me mixing while I'm painting, which is really nice. So.
Yeah, it's a great setup. So the students can see all the different elements of what you're doing. It's really helpful.
So I've been running one workshop about a month right now. I still have a live one I'm supposed to teach in August, but who knows if this is going to go on or not. We don't know. Things aren't looking too hopeful right now.
We will see where we are.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's a nice little studio. I would like it if it was, 5 times as big, but it would be just as messy after a week. So, and it doesn't make me any more productive. So,
yeah, we expand to fill the space we have, don't we?
Oh, yes, we do. Yes, yes, yep.
And if you want to see the work that these wonderful artists have created for this exhibition, I'm just posting the link to the show on our website on westlandgallery.ca right now, so you can take a look. And if you're in London and you want to get out of the house and go for a little adventure, you can come and look through the windows of Westland Gallery. And we've got a lot of the work packed into the front half of the gallery for you, so you can take a look at the collection. Would any of the artists like to say anything in closing? All good?
Yes, yes, I would. I would just like to say that I've thoroughly enjoyed being accepted into this exhibition. And it's a lovely, warm welcome for my return to London. And I look forward to further involvement in the artistic community and possibly collaborating with other artists to create a series or works of art. Glass is very versatile. It can collaborate with texture, with painting, with object.
Your art looks like my paintings.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The connection is such a wonderful part of art, you know, collaborating in that way or putting a show together with a few different artists like we're doing right now and getting the opportunity to talk with you all. So again, a big thank you. And everyone,
Danielle, thank you for all your hard work.
thank you.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the rest of your Sunday, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Bye, thanks
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.